Well, obviously, there's a lot of words have been spoken about Robert Maxwell, Brian Clough. These are icons and, within their era. And I felt I had my own story to tell. I was very close to the fire when we were working with these guys, and I knew exactly what went on during that period. And as such, basically, I felt I had a story to tell.
So let's go right back to the beginning. You're at Preston.
Yep.
You're learning the trade. And then Brian Clough presents you in front of the boardroom at Derby. Can you remember walking into that boardroom and how you felt?
Very clear. I was sort of spaced out. I'd come down the night before, met Brian, Midland Hotel, chatted, come to the baseball ground tomorrow morning, don't be late, best suit on, all that. I arrived, Rolls Royces in the car park, walked in looking for Brian or whoever, and he appears, walks me into the boardroom, all the guys smoking cigars, sat around the table, throws me in the boardroom and says, this is the guy, I want to be the new Secretary of Derby County. End of story. It was magical.
Brian, when you read about him, when you hear stories about him, he has that character where, I guess, if he wants somebody, if he wants something, he gets them. And you were part of that right at the beginning.
I was. I was part of that, him creating what was the modern day at the time, Derby County, the success of what was happening. And then, as he introduced me to the board, he turned around very cheekily to the whole of the directors, who were very wealthy businessmen in their own right, and turned around and said, excuse me, gentlemen, I've got to now excuse myself to look after the most important people in this club, the players. Goodbye, and walked away. Now, can you imagine that present day with Mr. Wenger, Mourinho, these guys? That was unbelievable what he did. He was creating his own club, and I was part of it.
When you began as secretary, what state was the club in? Obviously, there'd been this Football League book inspection. Somebody had got the police in, and there were certain things that were being investigated. What kind of things did you have to sort of implement and change, etc.? What impact did you have?
Well, to be honest, it was a mess. It wasn't a mess through criminality. It was a mess through neglect. People didn't understand what they should have been doing. The people who were running the club were under Brian's sort of magical spell, and there was nobody who understood how football should be run. So it was a technical situation that needed sorting, and I managed to do it.
Being the administrator as well, how much had you learnt at Preston that you brought down with you? Because obviously you're young into this job. How did you know that what you were going to do was going to be right?
I had good experience. I'd been around at Preston. We went to the FA Cup final, so I knew how the administration should work. In my own ideas, I also had the commercial view of what I wanted to do with the club, the junior Rams and all the other stuff that came with it. So I knew what I wanted to do. So I knew what was important to put the club on the right track. And so I immediately implemented. There wasn't a lot of things to be done. It's just that there was a lot of neglect and people not understanding what was needed running a football club.
Let's talk about Clough and Taylor. That's where really the success started for Derby when they arrived in the late 60s, and then you arrived. What was it that made them work so well, do you think?
Well, they're a magical combination. I mean, they were fantastic. Together, they were unique. And obviously, when they split over the years and they got back together, it wasn't the same. Those days at Derby were so unique to what we all know in Derby as Derby supporters. It was a fantastic era, and they started it. And Brian and Peter created that, and it went from there. They were great together. Fantastic team.
And doing your job, obviously Brian Clough wanted to run the whole club from top to bottom, but you were there running the administration side of it. And did you have to fend off that kind of interference, shall we say?
Well, he had run the whole club, and that was the problem that it wasn't running right because he was a football man. He wasn't an administrator. So I had to come in and do my own bit. And from that point, there was a problem of me trying to identify myself of running the operation, to bring in my part and my skills to the team and made it successful. And eventually we got it right. And Peter was fantastic in bringing that along, but Brian wanted to do it his way. So all in all, we got along in the end, but it was hard work getting there, I can assure you.
Bringing players in, it's been well documented that Peter Taylor would identify the talent and Brian Clough would go in there and secure the deal and really sort of, send flowers to wives and sweet talk.
No, I think it was a successful formula. I mean, Peter did, he was a talent spotter. Brian had the magic to bring them to the table. And the combination worked. But whatever they did, whether they were building a family, they were building the Derby County family, the players' wives, when they had children and all the rest of it. It was part of that era, and they were magic. They created it. They were magicians at what they did.
Didn't always go well, though. Tell me about Ian's story more.
Oh, Christ, that was bad. I mean, that was a bad scene. I mean, we thought we could blunderbuss the whole of football. I mean, Brian wanted Ian Storey-Moore coming from Forest. Forest wouldn't allow him to come. He wanted to come. He was to come to Peter and Brian's charm, so he wanted to leave Forest. So he came overnight at the baseball ground, at the Midland with the players. We decided we'd try and break the mold and force Forest into releasing him to come to us. So we walked him on the pitch as our player. Standing ovation, all the crowd, and of course it didn't work. But of course during that period, we wanted to know how we could break the mold. Peter and I and Brian said, okay, let's walk in on the pitch. Let's tell everybody he's our player. Of course, when we walked out, there's no Brian. Peter and I walked out with Ian Storey-Moore looking for Brian, and he stayed behind in the dressing room. So Peter and I got into trouble, big trouble.
Do you think Brian saw that coming?
Oh, he was ahead of it. Of course he was. He was a shrewd operator. He knew what he wanted and how to do it. And he felt probably he got Peter and I as fall guys to walk out and do it. Good. It's all good fun. But Derby County got a slap in the face again as usual. And the board of directors had to face it. Peter wasn't happy. I wasn't happy. But it was part of those glory days.
That first championship, you've been there a couple of years. Things were moving behind the scenes. How much did that have felt that little old Derby County beat the rest and became the best?
It was quite unique. There's no doubt about it. It was, you've only got to look at when we won the championship. Who was disappointed? Don Revie, Bill Shankly, Alex Ferguson, Matt Busby, these guys of that era, they were disappointed. You know why? Because we had won it. And they were icons. So these two, Brian Clough and Peter Taylor, had come in, knocked it into shape. Little old Derby had done our Leicester City. We'd done what Leicester have done, but did it twice. We were unique, and we were fantastic at what we did. And all of us firing on full cylinders, nobody could touch us. We were unique, and we proved it. We won the league.
With that league championship brought European football, Juventus is still a team it's got a sour note in most Derby County supporters' minds. I mean, even now, all these years on. Tell us about that night, Helmut Haller in the dressing room, and all hell breaks loose.
Well, there was without doubt skullduggery. I was there in the tunnel. Peter and I saw the dressing room scene. We saw Haller talking to the referee. We knew something was going on. And then all of a sudden, we come out second half, there's penalties given, there's all sorts. It was a carve-up. And then, of course, Brian Granville of the Times started to investigate it, didn't get very far, because Juventus always had a middleman in between them and the referee. But the referee, Lobo, was very honest. He went to FIFA, and UEFA told them that he'd been approached and all of that. So there was a lot of history, but nobody could prove that Juventus basically had tried to fix the ref.
From then on, Clough and Taylor's relationship still living strong at Derby, but the board relationship not so because of the the signings that Clough and Taylor wanted to make, the money that wasn't available, then had to be available because the signings have already been committed to. Watching on from that relationship with Clough and Taylor and then Clough and Longson and how that deteriorated, you'd built this club behind the scenes to a really well-oiled machine. And did you think at the time, if you lost Clough, that it could all come crashing down eventually?
I was very much aware that we had to maintain the status quo, that Brian and Peter were part of that era, and it was heading towards the rocks. You know, Brian was speaking to the media, upsetting the FA and the league, so we were getting in the neck. The chairman didn't like it, the board didn't like it. We've been under 2 or 3 official investigations. We didn't want another one. So all of that. So yes, we tried to keep it together, but it wasn't, because Brian was a runaway train. He believed in what he was doing, and who could argue he was successful. But the board couldn't stand it. There was a split. And however I tried to bring it together, it was a split. It was happening.
And then one calling of the bluff too far, I guess.
Well, yes. I mean, they always came in for extra money and deals, and we managed to sort it out for them. But on that day when they resigned, the board accepted it. You know, total chaos. The baseball ground was, you know, the center of the nation. The whole world was coming down saying, what's happening? It was a great shame and a great tragedy that it happened. And I worked so hard to keep it together. Unfortunately, it didn't happen. The board wanted to be the strong people in it, as directors should be, and Brian and Peter felt they were strong.
Did Brian come to you to try? I mean, I know that your relationship had deteriorated quite a bit by then, but did he come to you to try and get a favour out of you, to try and work some magic?
No. Brian thought that I was part of the board. He felt that I was sitting with the board as the company secretary, general manager, whatever. I was part of that scene. He should have done, because I realised that football, man, what was needed and what we had succeeded in could have been continued. But no, he was hell-bent that it was him or the board, and that's when the trouble started.
There was a letter of resignation from all the playing staff that didn't find its way into your possession, but it could have been very, very different, couldn't it?
Well, it was. I mean, the players were threatening to go on strike. I was talking to the PFA, to the FA, and everybody concerned. Terry Hennessy was the players' representative. He was coming in every day. People were trying to take the sting out of the situation. But in the end of it, you know, the players didn't go on strike. They saw what were the most important thing they were paid for, to play football for Derby, and they did. And on that fateful day, after Brian had gone, they beat Leicester, and it all happened. But they're professionals. They were very professional people, but they were so behind Brian and Peter and against the board, the club, and myself as part of that. It was a very difficult time.
Dave Mackay was the only man, I guess, that you could have employed to, because a lot of the players were still people that he played with, to sort of calm the situation down. And then another league championship followed soon after.
Well, first of all, I went for Bobby Robson, who was at Ipswich, talked to Bobby, tried to persuade him, because his brother, his family were in Derbyshire. He was quite keen to chat, but I think he was probably using the situation. So Dave was the obvious one, and the players idolised him, they played with him, and he was the one who came in and grabbed it by the scruff of the neck. Another era and another championship. I mean, two championships in 3 years by 2 different managers. The club went through hell and back, but we did it. You know, we did it.
From then on, decline, I guess. One thing that really stood out to me was the name of Bill Shankly when Colin Murphy was the manager. And Bill Shankly had left Liverpool under a cloud, probably not the best way to leave the place where he'd brought so much success. And he turned up at the baseball ground. And for me, that was a surprise that I didn't know that part of history. And I guess some others listening wouldn't either.
Yeah, I mean, Shanks I knew, He had left Liverpool in a bit of a cloud. He was drifting. We had Colin Murphy and Dario Gradi as our new managers. I felt they were totally inexperienced. They needed help. So I spoke to Bill and said, look, would you come down? Would you come and share a bit of your experience with these guys? Set it all up. It was very difficult to get Bill to commit, but he did. I think Colin Murphy felt threatened, so he was never really accepted. But he came down, he had a couple of months, went in the dressing room, tried to give advice. I mean, who would not have Bill Shankly in his dressing room? If I'm the manager, a young manager wanting somebody, of course you would. And this is what Brian would have done, Peter would have done. I mean, when we went to Juventus, we took John Charles on the front of the coach. Anything to give you an extra inch to get where you want to be. And I felt Bill Shankly was good for Derby at the time. But unfortunately, Colin wouldn't accept him, and Bill drifted away. But a great name, a great character.
Let's move on to 1984. How did Derby get itself in such a mess in 1984?
You know, you're going through situations where you're spending more than you've got, things aren't working out, the gates aren't as good, the results, and it starts to spiral. And this happens. And it can happen in football. And that's what happened. And we found ourselves in trouble, real trouble. And John Kirkland and his family, to some extent, had done a great job in holding it all together. But enough was enough. And John, at that fateful meeting, turned around and said, look, guys, I can't go on. You know, we have to look at this in a serious, professional way. And we did, and we addressed it, and we stuck together, and we went on.
To mention Juventus again, you quite liked that business model, didn't you? Owned by Fiat, bankrolled the football club. That was something that you were trying to achieve, I gather.
It was. I mean, I'd seen it when we travelled in Europe, that these big conglomerates, and who obviously could use it as a tax benefit. You know, a great conglomerate owning a football club is a no-brainer, because they could use it and build up and create something that was needed. And as a consequence, that's why I went to Maxwell in that view that he would come in and support the club through his businesses and save tax and become, you know, a great institution, one would have thought.
Before it got to that stage, you were up and down the High Court, the Telegraph, the Radio Derby. There were some pretty tragic sounding headlines. It all spirals to that game, a big game. Plymouth Argyle in the quarter-final replay at the baseball ground. Wet Wednesday night, and you having your own battle in the High Court in London. You remember that vividly?
Very, very. It was it was shocking, because I was thinking everything was going smoothly. The team weren't doing too bad, and the FA Cup, bit of a run. Cash was coming in, we could pay the wages. I was in London. Maxwell had said basically he would come in and support the club maybe. And then all of a sudden the revenue said, no, this is it, you know, you're in trouble. He didn't want to be part of anything that he would be drawn into. He wanted a clean club. And he said, I'm sorry, I can't be part of this. If you're going to the High Court, sort yourself out, you and your directors, get on with it. And that was it. So came back from London. The game was being played. Got off the train in Nottingham. A lot of Nottingham supporters there were spotting me and giving us all the stuff that they would. And it was bad news. And that was really low. And it was a very low point in the history of Derby County.
How close did Derby come to being wound up?
It was as close as you would want. I mean, you would think it was as close as that. There's nowhere to go. We had a few people we were talking to. They were running out. You know, Arthur Willis, the club solicitor, was fantastic. The board supporting me, we were fantastic. But we'd nowhere to go. No one. You know, we were really hanging in with our fingernails. We were really on the edge. And it wasn't pleasant, I can assure you. But we all stuck in, we all fought, and we managed to come through. Did
you expect when you got that rescue package together that didn't have Maxwell involved at that time? Did you know where you were going next?
No, we didn't. We went out to the High Court, crossed to the pub, the Wigan Pen. We had a few beers, and there was 5 of us, and we said, right, what do? We've come through, we put some money in ourselves, we've got through the High Court, there were fans there with the black and white scarves. What do? And we looked at each other and we said, do we do it ourselves? We knew we'd no money. Or do we go to Maxwell and say, come on, it's the clean club you wanted. Come on in. And I think we made the right decision. History says we made the right decision. And we invited him in and off we went.
Do you remember that moment that you first met Robert Maxwell? Do you remember how you felt, how he made you feel?
Never forget it. I mean, he was, he thought he was Barnum and Bailey. He thought he was the man. And he was. I mean, he was so powerful. And I went into his office one night after a show for dinner. I was in for half an hour, thought I'd been in for 2 hours. And basically, he took over the whole thing. He was very strong, very powerful, asked me a couple of questions. Will you and I ever fall out? Crazy questions. And then asked for my number and said he'll come back to me and talk to me about Derby County in the next couple of days, which he did. But no, he was a powerful operator, without doubt.
Trust is huge in football, isn't it? Because everybody's conspiring against each other and everyone's trying to achieve the same thing. Did you ever trust Robert Maxwell?
No, you couldn't do. You couldn't do. He was a wheeler dealer. I mean, come on, he was on the world stage, and I was trying to pitch Derby County to him. It's a bit different than talking to the Prime Minister of Russia or somewhere. We were on our knees, but we knew what we wanted. But to get him in, and he came in, and he committed initially financially, and we won championships, and we built teams, and we did very, very well. So it was a good decision at the time, without doubt. But he was tough. He was a tough old bird to work with, I'll tell you.
What did you make of his helicopter flying over the baseball ground 10 minutes before kick-off on a Saturday?
It was all show business, wasn't it? I mean, it was what it was. He was that sort of guy. He loved it. He loved the team photographs. He loved signing Peter Shilton, who we'd probably got on a very free transfer for £1 million in the Mirror. It was his show business. That was Bob. But he came at the right time. He didn't see it through, but I felt he'd come out of politics and he needed football as a next platform to give him a little bit of oxygen. And football was good at the time. We were good for him. He was good for us. Didn't last, but while he was there, we won championships.
We talked about interference, Brian Clough trying to control what you did. You're about to appoint Arthur Cox, and Robert Maxwell phones you and says, Jim Smith.
The Bald Eagle.
The Bald Eagle.
That's right. He's the only manager he knew, because he was the manager of Oxford. And as such, he wanted him as his manager to put his own identity on Derby County. During the month before, I'd managed to persuade Arthur Cox and possibly Kevin Keegan to come down. They'd agreed to leave Newcastle. So there's no way I could then go back on what I'd done. Otherwise, we'd have been sued by those two, or certainly by Arthur. So when he said he's bringing, the Bald Eagle tomorrow morning, press conference, I was in trouble. So I had to ring Arthur and I tell him everything's okay. I had to ring Ian Maxwell. I was in the middle of this awful situation, not knowing who was going to turn up, who was going to be the new manager, what I was going to say at the press conference.
And then Johan Cruyff.
Oh, yeah.
That's a strange link, isn't it? Johan Cruyff and Derby County.
But anyone. I mean, Bob Maxwell would have gone anybody. He'd have got Elvis if he could. He was a guy who wanted the big name. So he meets Johan Cruyff somewhere and he invites him to be his coach. So here we are. He's coming. I've got to tell Arthur, Roy, and all the others that you might have a new coach, inverted commas, on Monday morning. Crazy.
I want to mention two names to you that will probably make you sit uneasily in your seat. Lubos Kubic and Ivo Noflicek. Now, it was on the 6 o'clock news with Sue Lawley. That's how prominent it got in the media in Britain. These are the two guys who escaped from a training camp in Germany with Slavia Prague. All of a sudden, Robert Maxwell wants them to play for his team in the top division, Derby County. And then there was a trip to Brussels with you and Arthur Cox, which was a little bit lively. Lively,
say the least. I mean, Robert Maxwell said, I want these guys They are internationals. They want to come to Derby. They are refugees. I want to help them become people. I want them to stand for Derby County. Go and sort it. You're the chief executive. Go and get it sorted. You and Arthur, go out to see them, meet them. We flew to Brussels, met these guys. Arthur was shaking. So was I. We didn't know what was going on. There was all sorts of strange people around. They'd absconded, and the Eastern Bloc countries were not happy. So there was guys with guns and all sorts of things hanging around the hotel lobby. We were trying to make friends with them to say, oh, Wes, we'd love you at Derby, I'm sure, but not knowing how we could do it. And I was thrown in the middle of it, and it was an awful mess. The guys were refugees. They went to stay in a house up in Cadaqués, where Roland Dahl used to live, and all of that. And it was awful. We were in a mess. But Bob Maxwell wanted it, and we had to try and make it work.
Arthur Cox is a strong personality, and fans will remember him for his Sergeant Major type authority. But he was rattled in this incident. Oh,
he was like I was. He was shaking because he saw what was going on, and he said, I've signed for Derby, not MI5. Here I am. I want to be part of a Derby County team, not trying to get these guys from behind the Iron Curtain to come. And, we went upstairs to bed, and we went up 3 at a time up the stairs. I was just about to go to bed, and Arthur said, put the wardrobe behind the door, Stuart, because things will happen. No, we were out of that place the next morning very quickly. It was a strange incident. And, of course, it all ended in tears. We tried our best, but the chairman and the owner wanted to get these two guys into the club.
Felt out of your depth in that situation.
Well, we were never going to win because we couldn't get the registration from the governments, from everything else. We tried everything we could. But at the end of the day, the guys were registered with a foreign club. FIFA and UEFA wouldn't allow it. He thought we could. It didn't work. But he was looking to save money. I mean, present day, 5 million apiece, 10 million, very good players. But we couldn't do it. But during that mix, that time, it was very touch and go for Arthur and I. We were in the middle of it.
Robert Maxwell's time at Derby ended in a bit of a farce, didn't it? It got nasty. Protests, Maxwell out posters around the ground. I had one that was signed by Gary Mickle, randomly. It wasn't a great place because Derby was struggling on the field and off the field. It was becoming ugly.
Well, it was. It was. I mean, as I said previously, in the early days, it was fantastic. He came in to put money in. But once the money dried up, once he realised that he wasn't going to be a great success with Derby, then he cut the purse strings, the club struggled, he lost interest, and when the crowd turned on him, he said straight away, hang on, if I'm not wanted here, I'm off. The club's for sale. So it did end in tears, but we had a very good early point when he came in.
Did you know what was his situation in the background at that time, his financial situation?
I had a feeling that all wasn't well. I mean, he put money in early on, and then when we tried to sign, obviously, Mark Wright, he said, no, I'm not prepared to sign Mark Wright. We had Mark in my office trying to do the deal. He wouldn't go along with it, And I thought, why won't he? English international, great prestige. Liverpool were chasing him. 1 or 2 big clubs, and we got him. So I got the feeling that wasn't right at the time. And probably he hadn't got the funds that we all thought he had.
Let's move forward in time. And Lionel Pickering bought the club and invested in the club. He'd made his millions in local papers. Another person who wanted to put back.
He was a football man, but he was a fan. He wasn't a football businessman. So he wanted to help the club, but he did it from a fan perspective. He didn't really appreciate the runnings of a club as modern-day millionaires would, whether at Man U, Chelsea or wherever. He was a fan at heart, and it didn't work out in the end. But there were some good years. We got Jim in. Jim Smith came in, and obviously we won promotion. So no, Lionel was a good Derby County man. He was a fan, but it just didn't work out.
Do you think fans with money is a recipe for disaster in a way because of the over-emotion, perhaps, that comes along with it?
It can be, but I think you've got to have a business head, and I think Mel Morris at Derby has a business feel for it. He's a businessman. He's been successful. He knows his way around. He knows dealing with people. So I think that is important, that you can deal with people and structure the business as you would your own business. Lionel had been a businessman, and as such, he was a fan more than a businessman.
Over the years that you were at the baseball ground, I mean, obviously all those memories, the narrow corridors, the squeaky doors down to the dressing room area, really tight environment down there. And then that decision to leave, I mean, that must have been really, really difficult to make as a group. But also knowing that if you made that decision, there's going to be 25, 30,000 people out there who say, hold on, I'm not sure about this.
It was a difficult decision, but the club has to move forward, and you have to have new facilities. So really, it was a no-brainer that you have to move forward with the times, and the club moved forward, and it was fantastic. Pride Park now today, as we stand, is a wonderful stadium. Fantastic.
You wanted the name, didn't you, of the baseball ground somehow incorporated into the new ground. Do you think that was a wise kind of decision on looking back?
It was my feeling. I'm a football man. I felt that wherever you went in the world, people always talked about the baseball ground. Wow, what's this about the baseball ground? Derby, is it football? Is it soccer? What is it? And I felt we could have probably incorporated. It wasn't to be. I put my view forward, and there we go. Time moves on. But I felt to keep that historic link between the baseball ground and all the history we had would have been great.
Do you remember the last day that you were at the baseball ground working?
Yeah, very much, very much.
How'd you feel?
I was sad, but I realized we had to move on. But great history. I mean, some of those nights, those great rainy nights, 40,000, fabulous nights. Benfica, Chelsea, you name it, Real Madrid, Charlie George hat-trick, fabulous. No, you can't walk away from your memories without feeling something for it. And I feel for Derby County. And as such, yes, it was arranged, but when I go back to Pride Park, it's fantastic.
You've not been involved in Derby County for around about 15 years now. Are you saddened the way it all ended for you after all those years of working there?
Not at all, no. There comes an end to everything. You cannot keep going. I had a lifetime involved with Derby. All the things I wanted, the highs and the lows, the championships. No, you have to move on. Somebody's got to blow the whistle, and somebody did, and that was it. I'm very happy with my life, and very happy to have shared great memories at Derby County and played a part and a role in the history.
What do you make of modern football now? The pound sign has taken over. There's transfers regularly, ridiculous amounts of money thrown around on wages as well. What do you make of it all? Having started with buckets of cash, selling tickets.
I think it's fantastic. And probably I was part of that because I was on the FA board that was selected, one of the 3 people selected to interview for the new chief exec. And I was part of that group, 3 of us, who appointed Richard Scudamore. Fabulous. All of it was good. What he's done is fantastic. The money's come in is really good. I'd like to see it coming down to the smaller clubs. I'd like to see not everything going to players and agents. I'd like to see somewhere the government or somebody come in and say, hang on, there's a ceiling where some of this TV money has got to go to grounds, got to go to help fans reduce match day prices, whatever, but not let it all go flooding in to the players and the agents. That's my only view of, but present day, it's fantastic. The money coming in is marvelous. And I think people running the clubs have got to realise that they're sitting on something very important for the next stage. But also try and lobby the government or the FA or the league to get some of it back into the stadiums and to help the fans instead of paying a lot of money for tickets.
So what do you make of Derby County at the moment? Do you get the chance to come back and see what's going on?
I come back occasionally, but I think the club's in very good hands. I think Mel's a sensible businessman. He's a fan. I think he needs a bit of time to put it together. I'm not so sure about his Derby way. I think The Derby way, the two Derby ways I've had is Brian Clough and Peter Taylor were defensive. Peter, being a goalkeeper, always wanted to play tight at the back. Dave was attacking. He signed Charlie George, Franny Lee, and obviously Bruce Rake's got a bucket full of goals. So two different. So the Derby way, in my way, is just winning. Just get your manager, get it right, get the fans behind you, and success will follow. Having
worked in and out of the boardroom, etc., and worked with some huge characters, what did you learn in your time in football? What's the one thing that you learned?
I certainly learned a lot from Brian Clough and Peter Taylor. Really did. Maxwell, not so much. Bit of a bully. But Brian and Peter, the management skills and the way they handled people, the way they made it work, stayed with me. And I think I put that into my businesses, as long as they'll travel, and the other business I've been with. I felt I learned a lot from how they managed people and players in those early days.
Do you have any regrets?
Not at all. Not